A Bird's-Eye View Back in Time by Gurubsar, Lankar Idabaguz. It is no secret that the Vishnu Society adopts a critical stance towards religions. However, this position is not based on hatred or hostility, but on a pursuit of transparency, honesty, and rational substantiation. Instead of making unfounded statements, the Society focuses on analyzing beliefs and traditions based on reason and historical frameworks. The starting point is not to condemn, but to understand what is and what demonstrably is not. Within this framework, the manner in which the past is interpreted also plays a crucial role. In many contemporary discussions, there is a tendency to judge behavior from earlier periods based on modern norms and values. This can lead to sharp and absolute judgments, such as the assertion that religious figures, including Muhammad, should be judged by the standards of the present day. Although such statements can be rhetorically powerful, they often fail to do sufficient justice to the historical context in which these figures lived. A more nuanced approach requires historical awareness, considering the social, cultural, and moral background of the time, without leading to the complete abandonment of critical reflection. In virtually all ancient societies, the age at which girls were married off or married was considerably lower than it is today. This was true not only for the Arab world, but also for societies described in the Bible and the Torah. For instance, marriages in the time of figures such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob took place within environments where family alliances and procreation were central, often at a younger age than is considered acceptable today. We also see marriages and relationships involving kings such as David and Solomon that raise questions by modern standards, but were embedded in the cultural and social order of the time. The point is not to condemn these figures or defend them using contemporary terms, but to acknowledge that norms about age, marriage, and adulthood have been strongly time and culture-bound. This does not mean that we must approve of everything from the past. On the contrary, our current standards on the protection of minors are precisely the result of historical development and moral progress. But honesty demands that we do not selectively apply those standards to one religion or one figure while ignoring similar patterns elsewhere. If Muhammad is labeled using modern terms, then that same reasoning should consistently be applied to figures such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from the Bible. In short, if Muhammad was a pedophile, then Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, and many other figures in the Bible were too. At the same time, religious texts show clear similarities among themselves. For instance, the Quran is an extreme derivative of the Bible, even though Islamic scholars vehemently deny this fact. Yet Muslims have adopted only a part of the cruelties and behaviors found in the Bible. Unfortunately, in modern times, they often express these more directly and explicitly, while Christians tend to display similar patterns in a more subtle and often hypocritical manner. One need only look at wars, the injustices within Western societies that claim to uphold democracy, and the everyday cruelties people inflict upon one another. It is important to acknowledge that no religious tradition has still been entirely free from periods of violence, oppression, and hostility, including the subordinate position of women. This reality is not limited to Islamic history. Profound and violent episodes have also occurred within the Christian tradition. Examples include the witch hunts and the Crusades, in which violence was legitimized in the name of religion and many innocent victims perished. Throughout history, religious justifications have frequently been used to legitimize oppression and violence, as seen in the Inquisition. In later periods, so-called Christian nations were also involved in colonialism, slavery, and large-scale wars that were justified by reference to the Bible. These developments illustrate the often contradictory role of religion within historical processes. In modern times, these patterns are not always explicitly framed in religious terms, yet they persist in power struggles, geopolitical conflicts, and internal tensions within Western societies, where violence, inequality, and injustice continue despite an explicit commitment to democracy and human rights. Also consider child abuse, murder, and violence stemming from jealousy and possessiveness, manifestations of moral failure that are not confined to any single religion or culture, but are inherent to humanity itself. Such problems are not limited to Islamic countries. They are also present within European Christian and Catholic societies worldwide, where issues such as sexual abuse, femicide, and pedophilia remain among the most pressing societal concerns. The core of the discussion should not lie in the question, who was or is worse, but rather in how believers can understand the past in an honest and balanced way and translate this understanding into improvement in the present, without using it to assign blame to others or to justify their own shortcomings, as reflected in the saying that the pot calls the kettle black. What is essential is how we arrive at better norms and values today. This requires sincere self-reflection and intellectual honesty, particularly in societies where outdated ideas continue to shape how people live and interact with one another. Progress implies that communities which still adhere strongly to norms from antiquity are respectfully encouraged to consider what can be improved, without staying bound to traditions that have lost their relevance. At the same time, the West has neither the moral authority to dominate others nor sufficient grounds to point fingers exclusively. Serious self-criticism is equally necessary. In addition, it is important that individuals do not allow themselves to be swept along by polarizing or hateful rhetoric, often advanced by those pursuing their own interests. This is particularly relevant within political contexts, where rhetoric and promises often diverge from reality once power has been obtained. For this reason, it is essential that citizens do not succumb to inflammatory influences, but instead seek information independently, continue to think critically, and rely on their own moral compass. This also requires a careful and evidence-based assessment of responsibility, in which both individuals and structures contributing to societal problems are held accountable in a fair and substantiated manner, without resorting to simplifications or unnuanced blame attribution. Thank you for your attention.